Are you trying to learn how to code in Python? Well, in this video, I'm going to give you guys a little crash course on Python and tell you guys about some of the things that I've learned in the past so that you can get started coding your own cool, fun projects without ever having to take a real Python class. Step number 1 is to click that subscribe button. Okay, now the second thing you're going to do is go to python.org, go to downloads, and download the latest version of Python. So you're just going to click through all of this, read the licenses, read the readmes, but you're just going to install it. And once you've installed it, you might be wondering, what now? So this is a fun part. This is a part where you kind of look like a hacker. So if you're on a Mac, you're going to click Command Space and look for Terminal. If you're on Windows, it's called like Command Prompt. And what Terminal is, it's basically a program that lets you interact with the shell. And the shell is just a program where the user can type in some commands and then interact with the operating system. Some of the things that you can do on shell, you can open different files, you can look for different files, you can search for specific words in specific files. It's very powerful. And the reason why we're using this is because this is how I like to run my scripts. If I type in Python 3, then you can actually pull up Python in Terminal and play around with it there. But if you have a script that you've written, if you type in Python 3 and then the file name of that script, you can actually run that script from Terminal. So if you go ahead and pull up Terminal or your version of Terminal, you can type in Python 3 and start playing around with Python right there. So in here, anything after the little carrots, the little arrows sideways, Python is evaluating that expression. And then the result is output below. So let's give this a try. The very first thing I'm going to type in is just a string A, and that outputs A. And then I'm going to type in the number 1, that outputs 1. But then you can also do things like 1 plus 2. And just like addition, that gives us 3. You can also do things with 2 strings. So A and B, if you want to put them together, you can do A plus B. And the output of that would be a string AB. You can also do things with variables. So for example, if I set X equals to 1, Y equals to 2, then whenever I evaluate X, it gives me 1. Whenever I evaluate Y, it gives me 2. And then X plus Y gives me, well, 1 plus 2, so that equals 3. And you could do a bunch of different things with these variables. You can do X times 2 plus Y times 3, that'll give you 8. Just like what we would expect. Variables are just like variables in algebra. They basically take a value and store it in some expression so you can use it later on without you ever having to really know what exactly it is. So Python seems simple enough, but how do you actually run a script? The purpose of a script is so that we don't have to focus on each individual line like here, but instead we run like functions and everything else together from within that script. So this just lets you build bigger projects. So let's get to that. Well, the first thing you need is something to actually edit the script. It's like if you're trying to write an essay, you actually need something to write the essay in, such as Microsoft Word. But instead, we're trying to do this for some code. So one of my favorite editors is Virtual Studio Code. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to VS Code's website. I'm going to download it. All right, and then let's open it. You probably want some sort of like organization structure. So what I typically do is every single folder is one project. And here, let's just make a new folder and let's call it tutorial for the sake of this tutorial. So from VS Code, I'm just going to open that entire folder. I'm going to create a new file inside that folder and just call it main.py. And here I'm just going to show you guys some examples of what happens if you run that code. Okay, so what happens if I take one of those things that I had put in Terminal previously and try it out here? So let's do 1 plus 2. In order to run a Python script, you have to type in the command and then whatever script you're referring to. So one thing to note is when you run this script, you actually have to give the right file path. And typically that means you have to be in the right folder. So we're going to do that through Terminal. All right, so the command ls just means list everything that's in your current directory. So for example, if you're in your documents folder, then it'll just list out every single thing that's in the documents folder. And then cd means change directory. So that means go into whatever folder. So here I'm going to go into my documents folder, and then I'm going to go into my tutorial folder. And there you can see that we have our file main.py. Here, let's just try running that. So python main.py. And you'll notice that I type in Python 3, and that's because on a Mac, it comes pre-installed with Python 2. But if you just type in Python, then it executes Python 2. You need to type in Python 3 in order to execute Python 3. You'll see that it doesn't actually print out anything. And why is that? We typed in 1 plus 2. And that's because when you type in 1 plus 2, even though Python will assign that a value of 3, you haven't actually told this to display it anywhere. In order to show what that actually is, we actually have to print it out. And you'll see that this equals 3. And we can print a bunch of other things too. So let's print this statement here. Let's do something like a lot more complicated. All right, running this, you'll see that it prints out all 3 of those things. Earlier, we also saw that we could assign values to variables. So here, let's do x equals 1 and y equals 2. And you'll see that the same principle applies. If we print x plus y, then that adds 1 plus 2, and we get 3. So just a quick little crash course on Python. I'm going to go over some of the types of values that you can actually have in a Python script. So first thing that you can have numbers. So those are things like integers and floats. Integers are what they sound like. They're integers, just like we've learned in math, which are things like 0, 1, 2, 3. We can also have floats. And floats are basically decimal numbers. 2.5, 3.14, etc., right? And you might be asking, what is the difference between 3 and 3.0? One is an integer and the other one's a float. If you're doing math in Python 3, there's not really much of a difference. But if you have a list of objects, there's such thing as a second thing in a list, but there's no such thing as a second and a half thing in a list. That's where the difference between integers and floats is going to come in handy. You can also have booleans, which are things like true and false. And these are useful for when we have different types of logic. And that logic is like, if something, then do this. And if something else, then do something else. And here we can also have different expressions that actually evaluate to true or false. For example, 1 double equal sign 2 is asking, does 1 equal 2? And that evaluates to false, of course. You can also have strings. Basically, I think of strings as text. Whatever text you put in within the quotation marks, that is literally what the string is. So for example, earlier we had x equals 1, and when we printed x, then we would get 1 printed out. But if you type in print and then put x within the quotation marks, then that makes x a string. So it's no longer a variable. And then what you get out is you get out the string x instead of 1. And we can also see, as we did before, we can add 2 strings. So if we add a plus b, then we actually get a new string ab. There are also list objects, and list objects are exactly what they sound like. They're a list of things. So we can have a list with 1, 2, 3, 5 different integers in it. We can have a list of different strings, such as ABC. We can also have lists that interchange all of these objects. We can have list of lists. We can have list of lists of lists of lists, and so on. And then there are other things such as tuples, dictionaries, sets. I'm not going to go over them because they're slightly more complicated, and this is just a quick little crash course, but they're very useful. Often when you're starting out as a beginner, what I've shown you are really the things that you'll need to focus on in order to start your introductory projects. And if you're interested, I do suggest that you check out like what these other data types are. Okay, so we have that, and now I'm just going to show you guys some other tools that are super helpful when you're coding. And one thing that's super helpful is going to be your loops, because, well, one thing that a computer can do really, really well is the same thing over and over again. For example, if we wanted to write something over and over again, we would have to manually write that out. But for a computer, all you have to do is tell it to print something, right? And there's no point in telling the computer to print blah, 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 and then on the next line, print blah, 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 the same thing, and copying and pasting that, because, well, then you're just doing as much work as if you were writing it out. So one thing that we can actually tell our script to do is to iterate. And there are 2 different types of loops that I'll be talking about. The first one is a while loop. And basically this while loop is just saying while, and then whatever statement is still true, then do this. And then once that statement at the very top is false, then we're gonna do something else. All right, so for our first example, I'm just gonna use x as a variable, and let's just say while x is less than 10. Pretty self-explanatory, pretty much English. It's just asking, is x less than 10? If it is, then we're gonna do whatever is within that while loop. So here we're just gonna print x, and then let's add 1. We can add 1 by saying x equals x plus 1. There's a shorthand way of expressing that, and that's just actually x plus equals 1. It means the same thing as just adding 1 to x. So before we can run this, we actually have to define x and set an initial value. So let's just say x equals 0. And now what happens when we run this loop? Well, x equals 0, so the first time it sees while x is less than 10, 0 is less than 10, so that's true. And then it'll print 0, and it should add 1 to x. So now we go back to the loop, and we're asking while x is less than 10. Well, now x is 1, so 1 is less than 10, and we're going to print again and add another 1. And it's going to keep doing that, right, until x hits 10. So let's take when x equals 9, then you have while 9 is less than 10, so that's still true. You're going to go down into the loop, you're going to print 9, and then you're going to add 1. So now x is 10. And you go back to this loop, and it's asking, well, while x is less than 10. But now 10 is not less than 10, so that becomes false, and that means you don't have to do what's actually in the loop. So at the very end of our script, to prove that this is actually done, I'm just going to say, hooray, we exited the loop, print x. And now let's try running that, and you'll see that we actually see that hooray, exited loop, 10. So the next type of loop is a for loop. It's basically iterating through every single thing within an iterable. And an iterable is something like a list, something that has like different objects in it. So for example, let's say for y, so for each object in this list, A, B, C, D, let's just print that thing. And then at the very end, we can say we exited the loop and let's just print that. So you'll see that this goes through each object in the list and prints it out, and then at the very end, we print, we're done. The next building block in Python that you'll need to know is a function. And functions are beautiful because they allow you to break down your code into smaller and smaller chunks so that they're easier to work with. You define a function by calling def, and then whatever you're going to name the function, and then 2 parentheses and a colon. Now these parentheses, you don't need to put anything in there, but if you do, then those are arguments that you're passing into the function. They're essentially placeholders, so that when you actually call the function, you can put your own things within those placeholders and it'll run the function on those things that you just passed in. The best way to recognize how exactly a function works is to look at an example. So let's define a function called addition and give it 2 parameters, x and y. So what I want this function to do is I just want it to add the 2 numbers, x and y. And we don't know what those numbers are yet, but that part doesn't really matter. Okay, so in any function, you want a return variable. You can think of this function as kind of a black box where you input 2 things, you call the function, and then it just outputs whatever your return thing is. So here, if we have the addition of x and y, then we want to return x plus y, and that's the value that we're going to get out of this function. You have your function, and now what? Okay, let's try running this function. Addition, 1 and 50. Well, we expect to get 51, right? Let's try running this and see what happens. You'll see that nothing actually shows up. And why is that? It's because of the same thing that happened earlier. We actually have to print it out in order for the console to see it. So we can print addition 150 and we'll actually get 51 right here. Let's make something a little bit more complicated. Maybe we have a list of integers and we want to add 1 to every single integer. So here I can use a for loop. For item in this list, I'm just going to take that item and I'm going to say the item equals item plus 1. And I'm going to put that into a new list. So I'm going to create a new list. It's going to be empty. And in order to add to that new list, I call this .append function. So it's taking that new list and it's just adding in whatever item equals. And then at the very end, after the for loop, I want to return the new list. This is our black box. We give it a list. It goes into this black box and we return a list where every single number has 1 added to it. Let's see that in action. Let's just print add 1 in loop, and then give it a list of integers 1, 2, 3. And here we're expecting to see it print out 2, 3, 4. And that's exactly what it does. And I briefly mentioned if statements before. So now let's see how if statements can actually tell a computer what to do. Basically, if statements, if it's one thing, then do this. If it's something else, do that. So here I want to create a function where I'm going to input 2 values, x and y. If x is less than y, I'm going to print out, hey, this is too low. If x is greater than y, then I'm going to print out too high. And if x is equal to y, I'm going to print out equal and a smiley face. And here we can use an if statement, and then we can use an elif statement, which means else if. And if that's not true, then we have this else statement that says everything else that wasn't evaluated earlier, then do this. And let's try this out. So let's assign a secret number equals to 15. Okay, so we're gonna use our variables here. Secret number equals 15. And then we're gonna print number relation. So basically the function that we just wrote, 10 comma secret number. So remember that secret number equals 15. This is basically gonna ask, if 10 is greater than 15, print out too high. And if none of that, then print out equal. So we're gonna expect that it's too low. And that's exactly what happens. Now let's try this with 20 and see what happens. It's not less than our secret number, but it is greater, which means that it's actually gonna print out too high. That's what happens. And then let's try 16. Cool, that's equal. So this does exactly what we wanted it to. And also what's really powerful is that you saw that we passed in a variable, secret number, into this function, but we can also pass in other functions, the return values of other functions. For example, we can call number relation on the addition function with two different numbers in it. So here I'm going to do addition 15 and 236. So that's 15 plus 236, whatever that equals. And then I'm also going to do addition and then 1263 and negative 478. So yes, we can actually do addition of two numbers, even if one of them is negative, which really makes it subtraction, but hey, that's math. The beauty of Python is we don't actually have to know what addition 15 236 equals. We can just print this out and we can ask the computer, hey, is the first thing lower or higher or equal to the second thing? And we could get our answer just like that. All right, so now I want to show you guys how to build a little game using the principles that we just saw. So in my little game, what I want to do is I want the computer to randomly generate a number between 1 and 10. And then I want to take some user input and try to guess the computer's secret number. If you're new, this might sound a little bit complicated, but watch the rest of this and you'll see how easy it is with the things that I just taught you. One thing that is really important to coding that I never really got taught in a class is something called imports. Imports are basically telling the script, hey, take this code that was already written and bring it into this script so that I can use it. So first we're going to try importing a package. And the package that I want to import is called random, because this is a great Python package where it allows a computer to randomly choose a number without you having to do anything. All you have to do is call random.randint, and the package already has all of that code for you. So this is random. You can scroll through and see all the functions that are available to you when you import random into your script. And the beauty of all of this is you don't even need to see the code behind it. You just need to call that one little line. It'll get you the value that you want. I want the computer to generate a random number. And here we see that random.randint will do exactly that. It'll choose a number between 1 and 10. Let's just try seeing the magic of an import. If I'm asking random.randint 1, 10, then I'm just going to print that out. Just to prove to you guys that it's actually randomly choosing stuff, I'm going to put in a little for loop and tell the computer to print this out 10 times. Here you'll notice that I don't actually use a list, I use range 10. And basically what that equates to is numbers 0 through 9. And that is 10 numbers. Range is a little bit funky because it starts at 0 and it goes until whatever number you put in minus 1. So range of 11 would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and not 11. But anyways, let's try running that. And you'll see that these are randomly generated numbers. There's no sequence. And I can do this a couple times to show you guys that it's not pre-programmed. It's actually just spitting out random numbers. So that's pretty cool, right? So we didn't even need to code anything to get a random number. We just needed to copy and paste one line from the internet. How beautiful is that? Now, something else is we've already coded this number relation. One good coding practice is you don't want to duplicate your code, because if you duplicate it, you might realize that the original code was wrong, and you can go back and change that original code. But let's say you duplicated it 100 times in 100 different places. Are you going to be able to keep track of all 100 of those and be able to change? And are you going to want to change the same thing in every single one of those? No. You just want to be able to fix it once and then be able to plug it in and not have to worry about the 100 times that you called that function. So here, I'm going to show you guys how to import something that you've already written. And if we're in the same folder, you can import function, which would import all the functions, all the variables from function.py. Or you can say from function import and then number relation, whatever the function name is. So then that picks that one function and imports it. To prove that we can actually run this from a different file, I'm just going to run this on an example. And we would expect this to come out as too low. So running this, hold up. It actually prints out too low twice. Why is that? We only wanted to print out once in this file. So if you look back at our function.py file, you'll actually notice that at the bottom we have another print statement. Print, number relation, whatever. When you're running game.py, whatever you have imported, you're actually going into those files, you're compiling the code there, which means that that is actually getting printed out when we run a different file. So how do we fix that? This is why in a lot of my other videos, I have this little if statement at the bottom. If name equals main. That part is saying only if you run this file directly from Python. So here, only if we run python3 function.py from terminal is it going to run the stuff underneath that if statement. Let's go back and try running game.py again. You'll see that it only prints out one thing now. Just like before, it's good practice to have these name equals mains because you might have a bunch of print statements and you don't know where they're coming from. So I'm just going to stick that in here too. So I'm going to create a new function called playGame. And here in this game, well, I want the user to input a number between 1 and 10. And so here, in order to ask for the user input, Python has this function called input. It's brilliantly named. Basically, we're going to ask input, and then whatever string you put in there is just going to be the prompt for the user. So enter a number between 1 and 10. So before we move on, let's just try that real fast. Okay, enter a number between 1 and 10, 3, cool, num is equal to 3 here. And then I want the computer to pick a random number, right? So at the very top, I'm actually going to say computer number equals random.randint and then 1 to 10 because I want the computer to choose a random number between 1 and 10. We are trying to guess that number, so now we want our input. And here, what's really cool is we can just call number relation, print out that, and give it two inputs, our number and the computer's number. Let's try running that. I'm feeling 3. Wow, it's equal. That was actually pretty lucky. 7. Okay, that was equal to. Let's try this again. Okay, see, too low. It works. 9. Too high. So we get the idea. The script is working. Okay, now how do we make that so that it's a game where the user can keep guessing until they guess the right number? And we're going to use a while loop because we don't actually know how many iterations it's going to take for the user to guess the right number. So here, the best thing to do is to keep evaluating what the result is. And if it equals equal, then we stop. So our while loop is going to be while the result is not equal, then we're going to do the rest of this. And we're going to keep iterating until we finally get the right number. And in order to do that, at the very top, we also have to actually define result. Because if we don't define result, then the computer won't be able to evaluate this expression because the computer doesn't know what result stands for. Every time we run number relation, we want the return value of that to be assigned to this variable result. So let's just give that a try. I'm going to run the script and guess 3, it's too low, 6, too high, 5, it's equal. And now, as we see, we're not asked for our input anymore, which means that the while loop has stopped. And just to prove that the computer only has one random number and it's not changing it up every time, let's just try printing out what that number is every time so that we can have more assurance that our script is actually doing the right thing. So it looks like our magic number is 8. It looks like this function is doing exactly what we want it to. So cool, there's your game, and we're using this imported function, which is really cool. But in coding, you sometimes want to just keep things the simplest they can be. So instead of trying to evaluate the result and then comparing the string of that result to this other string, why don't we just compare the two numbers directly? Let's actually use a different while loop. while the number that the user has guessed does not equal the computer's secret number, then we're gonna wanna run through this while loop. And at the very top, again, we're gonna have to initialize num to something that is not gonna be what the computer is gonna randomly generate. So it can't be a number between 1 and 10. Let's just assign it -1 because that's safe. And then now we kind of lose our clues, our if statements. So we have to put those back in. If the number is less than the computer number, then we wanna print too low. If the number is greater than the computer number, we're gonna print too high. Otherwise, we're gonna print equal. And let's try running that. Cool, so our number was 9. And yeah, that is literally how easy it is to create your first game in Python. You just created a game where you are trying to guess a computer's number. That's pretty cool, and it doesn't stop until you are done. So coding is super cool, projects are cool. I've done other videos. You can do hangman, you can do tic-tac-toe, you can even do undefeatable tic-tac-toe, and you can do that with what you've just learned here, which is really, really, really awesome. Check out the other videos on my channel, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.